She stood at the entrance of the grand reception hall, holding a place card with trembling fingers, watching elegantly dressed guests laugh and toast champagne, while a waiter pointed her toward the corner to a folding table hidden behind a potted palm set for one. The girl with one arm banished to eat alone at her own sister's wedding. But she didn't know that in exactly 3 minutes a widowed father would stand up from his table, walk across that glittering room full of judges and hypocrites, and speak 6 words that would shatter 10 years of carefully constructed cruelty. "Act like you're with me, please." The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across Imani's brown face as she stared at the makeshift table, a cheap folding setup with a paper tablecloth tucked behind a dying palm tree, like something shameful that needed hiding. Her natural hair was pulled back in a simple style, her modest beige dress carefully chosen to not draw attention. "Miss, that's your assigned seat," the waiter repeated, his eyes avoiding hers, clearly uncomfortable with what he'd been instructed to do. The Whitfields were very specific about the seating arrangement. The Whitfields, not mom and dad, never mom and dad, not once in 10 years. "I understand," Imani whispered, her voice barely audible over the jazz quartet playing in the corner. She adjusted her dress with her right hand, her only hand, and started the long walk across the reception hall. 200 pairs of eyes pretended not to watch. 200 guests in designer gowns and Italian suits pretended not to notice the 22-year-old black woman being segregated like she carried something contagious. Shawn Carter loosened his tie, the champagne in his glass untouched, his attention fixed on the young woman navigating through the sea of round tables, draped in silk and adorned with towering orchid centerpieces. Each table sat 8, each table but one. His dark skin gleamed under the chandeliers as he watched her with growing concern. "Can you believe Alyssa actually invited her?" The woman at the next table didn't bother lowering her voice. "I mean, after everything the Whitfields did for that girl, taking her in after that horrible accident, raising her like their own." "Like their own?" Her companion scoffed. "Please, Linda. We all know why Winston really adopted her. His company was hemorrhaging money after those layoffs. Taking in a disabled black orphan was the best PR move he ever made. Diversity and disability all in one photo op." Shawn's hand tightened around his glass. He watched Imani reach her table, saw her shoulders shake once, just once, before she sat down in that lonely chair, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the elaborate ice sculpture of 2 swans that she'd never be close enough to properly see. Daddy would have done something, he heard in his mind. Layla's voice, his 7-year-old daughter, wise beyond her years. Just this morning, she'd made him promise to make a friend at the wedding. "You're always alone, Daddy. Mommy wouldn't want that." Monique, 3 years gone, and her absence still felt like a fresh wound some days. She would have been halfway to that corner already, her fierce sense of justice blazing. She never could stand seeing someone isolated, someone made to feel less than human. The jazz quartet shifted to a slower melody. The bride, Alyssa, glided past in her $30,000 dress, her laugh tinkling like breaking glass. Her light skin and loosely curled hair, courtesy of the most expensive salon in the city, gleamed as she moved. When her eyes swept over Imani's corner, Shawn caught it. A flash of satisfaction, cruel and deliberate. That's when he stood up. "Shawn, where are you going?" Trina from accounting grabbed his sleeve. "They're about to serve the salmon." He gently pulled free. "There's something I need to do." Each step across that reception hall felt like walking through honey, thick and slow, every eye gradually turning to track his movement. A black man in a modest department store suit, walking away from his assigned place, walking toward the girl everyone had agreed to ignore. Imani didn't look up when his shadow fell across her table. She'd learned not to expect kindness from well-dressed strangers at fancy parties. "Excuse me." His voice was gentle. That's what made her finally raise her eyes. The unexpected gentleness. I'm Shawn Carter. I work with Andre. He gestured vaguely toward the head table where the groom sat beside his bride. I couldn't help but notice you're sitting alone. It's fine. The words came out practiced, automatic. This is where they wanted me to. I know, Shawn interrupted softly, pulling out the empty chair across from her without invitation. But here's the thing. My daughter, she's 7. She made me promise to make at least one new friend at this wedding. She worries about me being lonely since her mother passed away. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. Would you do me an enormous favor and act like you're with me, just for the reception? You'd really be helping me out. Imani's breath caught. She searched his face for the joke, for the cruelty that must be hiding behind those kind brown eyes, but all she found was a sadness that matched her own and something else. Genuine anger on her behalf. Your daughter, she managed, her voice cracking. She sounds very wise. Wiser than her old man most days. Shawn smiled, and it transformed his whole face. So what do you say? My table has an empty seat, and I could really use the company. These accounting folks are nice enough, but they've been talking about tax codes for the last 20 minutes. A laugh escaped her, small, surprised, the first genuine sound of joy she'd made all day. I don't know anything about tax codes. Perfect. Neither does anyone else. They just pretend. Shawn stood, offering his arm. Shall we? Imani stared at his extended elbow. In 10 years with the Whitfields, no one had ever offered their arm to her. They walked ahead, embarrassed by her missing limb, embarrassed by the reminder of the tragedy that brought her into their lives. People will stare, she warned. Let them. She stood slowly, her hand trembling as she placed it in the crook of his elbow. Together they began walking back across the reception hall, and the whispering started immediately, rippling out from their path like waves from a thrown stone. Everyone, Shawn announced as they reached his table, pulling out the empty chair beside his own with a flourish. This is Imani. These are my colleagues from Brennan and Associates. Trina's mouth fell open. James from payroll choked on his wine, but Shawn just smiled pleasantly, helping Imani into her seat as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Shawn? Trina hissed. Do you know who that is? That's the Whitfield's adopted daughter, the one they stuck in a corner to eat alone at her own sister's wedding. Shawn's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Yes, I noticed. The table fell silent. Imani stared at her plate, her cheeks burning. She started to stand. I should go back. Shawn's hand covered hers, gentle, warm, steadying. Please stay. That's when the storm arrived in silver heels and righteous fury. Denise Whitfield descended upon their table like an avenging angel in designer silk. Her husband Winston trailing behind, his face flushed with embarrassment and too much scotch. Both were black, but the kind who'd long ago decided that money could wash away any connection to struggle or community. Imani. Denise's voice could have frozen champagne. What do you think you're doing? Every conversation in a 30-foot radius stopped. The jazz quartet even seemed to play quieter, as if the musicians sensed the brewing drama. Imani shrank into herself, that practiced submission returning instantly. Mrs. Whitfield, I presume. Shawn stood slowly, positioning himself slightly between Denise and Imani. I'm Shawn Carter. I invited Imani to join our table. Is there a problem? Denise's perfectly Botoxed face tried to express outrage, achieving only a slight eyebrow twitch. This is a family matter. Mr. Carter, you don't understand the situation. Then enlighten me. We took this girl in out of the goodness of our hearts. Winston stepped forward, his words slightly slurred. When she had nowhere else to go, no one else who wanted her. We've fed her, clothed her, Sent her to school? Community college. Imani's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried. While Alyssa went to Yale. The silence that followed was deafening. Denise's composure cracked. How dare you? How dare she what? Shawn's calm voice cut through her building tirade. Tell the truth? That you took in a traumatized 12-year-old black girl not out of love, but because your husband's company needed good PR after laying off 300 employees. Gasps rippled through the growing audience. Someone had stopped the jazz quartet entirely now. Every eye in the reception hall had turned toward their corner. That's a lie. Winston's face had gone from red to purple. Is it? An elderly voice cut through the tension. Ms. Hattie, Andre's grandmother, approached with her walker, her eyes blazing with octogenarian fury. Because I remember the headlines, Winston. Whitfield Industry CEO opens heart and home to orphaned girl. Right next to the articles about black families losing their homes because of your layoffs. Imani found her voice then, soft but clear. 10 years of suppressed truth spilling out like water through a broken dam. I wasn't allowed to eat dinner with the family. I had an 8 p.m. curfew while Alyssa could stay out all night. You introduced me as a charity case we support at the country club. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I heard you tell your friends that taking me in was the best business decision Winston ever made. You ungrateful little... Denise stepped forward, but Shawn moved too, shielding Imani completely. Finish that sentence, he said quietly, dangerously. Please, give me a reason. The bride herself rustled over then, her wedding dress train carried by 2 bridesmaids, her face a mask of cold beauty. Mother, please, people are watching. Let them watch, Shawn said firmly. Let them see how you treat family. Alyssa turned to Imani, her eyes like chips of ice. You're ruining my wedding. No, Ms. Hattie interjected, her walker thumping against the floor for emphasis. Your family's cruelty is ruining your wedding. This young woman deserved love, not a decade-long business arrangement. Imani stood up shakily, her whole body trembling. I need some air. I'll come with you, Shawn said immediately. They walked out together, leaving behind 200 stunned guests and a family whose carefully constructed image had just shattered like the champagne glass Winston threw against the wall in fury. The garden terrace was cool and quiet, the sounds of scandal muffled by distance and glass doors. Imani leaned against the stone railing, her body shaking with suppressed sobs. 10 years. 10 years of believing if I was just quiet enough, helpful enough, invisible enough, they'd actually love me. Shawn stood beside her, not touching, just present. Tell me about the accident. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Power line came down in a storm, hit our car. My parents died instantly. I was trapped for 3 hours, my arm crushed under the collapsed roof. They had to... She gestured at her missing limb. I was 12. The Whitfields showed up at the hospital with photographers. Denise held my hand for the pictures, then didn't touch me again for 6 months. My wife died 3 years ago, Shawn found himself saying. Brain aneurysm. 1 minute she was laughing at breakfast, the next she was gone. I know it's not the same, but I understand something about loss. About existing in spaces where you don't quite belong, trying to be invisible enough that no one asks you to leave. Imani turned to look at him then, really look at him. Why did you really come to my table? Because I saw someone who needed to know they weren't alone, and because... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because something about you reminded me that staying silent in the face of cruelty makes us complicit. Your wife would be proud of you. I hope so. She had this way of seeing people who were trying to disappear and making them feel seen in the best way. He smiled sadly. She would have liked you. They returned to the reception to find chaos. Half the guests had left in disgust. The other half were clustered in groups, whispering furiously. The Whitfields sat at the head table like ice sculptures, rigid and cold. but Miss Hattie had commandeered the microphone. 53 years of marriage taught me something, she was saying. Family isn't about blood or adoption papers or tax write-offs. It's about choosing to love someone every single day, even when, especially when, it's hard. She looked directly at the Whitfields. Some of you could learn from that. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Shawn and Imani danced to one slow song, her single arm wrapped around his neck, his hands steady at her waist, anchoring her. Other guests approached throughout the evening, some offering support, others sharing their own stories of the Whitfields' casual cruelties over the years. They made their housekeeper's daughter wait outside during Alyssa's birthday parties, one woman whispered. Winston fired my husband 2 weeks before Christmas, then bought a yacht, added another. At midnight, as the reception finally ended, Alyssa approached one last time. Her makeup had run, leaving black streams down her perfect cheeks. Are you happy now? She hissed at Imani. You've destroyed everything. No, Imani replied quietly. You destroyed it the day you let them put me at that table alone. Alyssa's hand raised as if to slap her, but Shawn caught her wrist. Touch her, he said calmly, and I'll ensure every newspaper in the state runs this story with photos. Alyssa yanked free and stormed off, her train dragging behind her like the remnants of her reputation. The next morning, Imani's phone rang at 6 a.m. Denise's voice was arctic. You have 30 days to leave. Pack your things and get out. The line went dead. Imani sat on her narrow bed in the servants' wing of the Whitfield mansion, because of course that's where they'd put her, and didn't cry. She had run out of tears somewhere around year 5. Her phone rang again. Shawn. I heard, he said without preamble. Trina's cousin was working the coat check last night. News travels fast in a small town. I'll be fine. I've been saving money from my library job. Come stay with us. The words hung in the air like a lifeline. Shawn, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. We have a spare room. Layla would love the company, and frankly, so would I. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you deserve better than what you've gotten. Let us be your soft landing. 2 weeks later, Shawn and 7-year-old Layla pulled up to the Whitfield mansion in his 10-year-old sedan. Imani waited on the steps with 2 suitcases and a backpack, her entire life in 3 bags. Denise watched from an upstairs window, her face a mask of cold fury. Winston was at his office. He hadn't spoken to Imani since the wedding, but Alyssa stood in the doorway, still in her silk pajamas at noon. You've ruined everything, she said, her voice flat. Andre's family is questioning if I'm like my parents. People are calling us monsters. No, Shawn said, lifting Imani's suitcases into his trunk. Your actions made you monsters. Imani just stopped letting you hide it. Layla, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly piped up, her beautiful afro puffs bouncing as she spoke. Why were you so mean to Miss Imani? Alyssa stared at the child. You wouldn't understand. I'm 7, not dumb, Layla said seriously. Daddy says family means choosing to love someone every day, even when it's hard. You just chose to be mean instead. The drive to Shawn's house was quiet until Layla asked, Miss Imani, why didn't you have a mom and dad? They died when I was 12, Imani said softly. My mommy died too, when I was 4. Layla reached forward from her booster seat to pat Imani's shoulder with a sticky hand. But Daddy says the people who love us never really leave. They just love us from farther away. Shawn met Imani's eyes in the rearview mirror. She was crying silently, but for the first time in 10 years, they weren't tears of pain. The Carter house was modest, a 2-story colonial in a historically black neighborhood with a wraparound porch and a yard that needed mowing. But when Imani walked through the door, she saw what the Whitfield mansion with all its marble and crystal had never had: warmth. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator. Photos lined the mantel. Shawn and Monique on their wedding day. Layla's first steps, family vacations to Martha's Vineyard, life lived out loud, not performed for an audience. "Your room's upstairs," Shawn said, carrying her suitcases. "It's not much, but—" "It's perfect," Imani interrupted, looking at the small space with its quilted bedspread and window overlooking the garden. "It's mine." That first night, she joined them for dinner. Spaghetti with jarred sauce and frozen garlic bread. Layla chattered about school, getting sauce on everything. Shawn didn't scold her, just laughed and handed her more napkins. Nobody made Imani eat in another room. Nobody timed her curfew. Nobody introduced her as a charity case. She was simply Imani. Over the following months, something beautiful began to grow in that little colonial house. Imani helped Layla with homework, her patience endless even with Common Core math that made no sense to any of them. She cooked dinners when Shawn worked late, learning Monique's recipes from the handwritten cards in the kitchen drawer. She told bedtime stories and slowly, carefully, began to smile without checking if she was allowed to first. Shawn found himself looking forward to the evenings after Layla went to bed, when he and Imani would sit on the porch with sweet tea and talk about books and loss and dreams deferred but not destroyed, about the future that suddenly seemed less lonely for both of them. "I applied to the state university," Imani told him one evening 6 months after she'd moved in. "They have a scholarship program for non-traditional students. I want to be a social worker. Help kids who've been through trauma." "You'll be amazing at it." "The Whitfields said I'd never amount to anything." The Whitfields were wrong about everything that mattered. She got the scholarship. The day the acceptance letter came, Layla made a banner out of construction paper and glitter that said, "Congratulations, Aunt Imani," and hung it across the living room. They celebrated with pizza and root beer floats, and if Imani cried into her ice cream, nobody mentioned it. That night, after Layla was asleep, Shawn found Imani on the porch, the acceptance letter still clutched in her hand. "I never thanked you properly," she said quietly. "Not just for the wedding, but for showing me what a real family feels like." Shawn sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You don't need to thank us. You've given us just as much. Layla adores you. And I—" He paused, realizing the truth he'd been avoiding for months. "I hadn't realized how lonely I was until you showed me I wasn't anymore." Their eyes met in the porch light. Imani reached for his hand with her only arm, and Shawn took it gently, like it was something precious. "Monique would have wanted this," Shawn said softly. "She would have wanted us to find happiness again." "Are you happy?" Imani asked. "Happier than I've been in 3 years." "I love you," she whispered, the words escaping like birds that had been caged too long. "I love you too." They were married 1 year later in the backyard of that same colonial house. Layla was the flower girl, maid of honor, and ring bearer all rolled into one, throwing rose petals with enthusiastic abandon and only dropping the rings twice. Trina, from accounting, officiated. She'd gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Ms. Hattie sat in the front row, beaming like she'd personally orchestrated the whole thing. Maybe she had. The Whitfields weren't invited. Shawn had heard through workplace gossip that their company's reputation never recovered. Several major clients pulled their contracts after the wedding story made the rounds. Denise had been asked to resign from 3 charity boards. Winston started drinking more, showed up to work less. Alyssa's marriage to Andre lasted exactly 8 months before he filed for divorce. But standing in his backyard, watching Imani walk down the aisle in a simple white dress with sunflowers in her hair, Shawn didn't think about the Whitfields at all. He thought about Monique, who would have loved this woman who'd learned to love their daughter like her own. He thought about Layla, who finally had a mother again. He thought about second chances and chosen families and the way love could grow in the most unexpected places. "Do you, Shawn, take Imani to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Trina asked, tears streaming down her face. "I do." "Do you, Imani, take Shawn to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by the internet and the state of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife." They kissed as Layla threw entire handfuls of petals at them, and if the photos were a little chaotic, well, that just made them perfect. 10 years later, at Layla's high school graduation, she stood at the podium as valedictorian and looked out at the crowd until she found her parents. "When I was 7, she began, "my dad went to a wedding and came home with the woman who would become my mother. He taught me that real love isn't about taking someone in for show. It's about saying, 'Act like you're with me,' and meaning, 'You are with me forever.' It's about choosing to stand beside someone when the world tries to make them stand alone." She paused, her voice growing stronger. "My mom lost her arm in an accident that took her birth parents. She survived 10 years with people who saw her as a prop, not a person. But she never let that break her kindness. She became a social worker and has helped hundreds of kids find real homes, not just houses. She taught me that families aren't built from obligation or blood. They're built from choice, the choice to love every single day." Shawn and Imani sat in the audience, their hands intertwined, his holding hers, the only one she had, but the only one she needed. Their other 2 children, one adopted from the foster system, one biological, sat beside them. Sometimes Shawn thought about that September wedding 13 years ago, when he'd stood up from his assigned seat and walked across a room full of people who thought staying silent was safer than speaking up. He thought about the moment he'd seen Imani at that table alone, and decided that his discomfort at intervening mattered less than her pain at being isolated. One choice, 6 words. "Act like you're with me, please." Those 6 words had built a family, saved 2 people from loneliness, given 3 children a home, and proved that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect bloodlines. Love was about showing up. Love was about saying you belong here, and meaning it. Love was about choosing each other over and over, especially when the world tried to convince you that you weren't worth choosing. The Whitfields had given Imani shelter but never a home. They'd given her food, but never a place at the table. They'd given her an address, but never belonging. Shawn had given her 6 words and changed everything. And in return, she'd given him everything too. A second chance at love, a mother for his daughter, a family that grew not from obligation, but from the radical act of choosing to care when it would have been easier not to. If you've ever felt alone in a crowded room, if you've ever been told you should be grateful for scraps when you deserved a feast, if you've ever wondered whether you belonged anywhere, remember this story. Remember that sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to stand up, walk across the room, and say, "You're with me now." Because families aren't built from blood or duty or tax deductions. They're built from the choice to love, especially when that love challenges the comfortable silence of those who'd rather look away.